Session on network transformation in action and industry use case and opportunities for DoD. We're glad to see you all here. I'm George Seifers, the editor-in-chief of Signal Magazine, and our panelists today are Jim Westdorp, Chief Technologist, Sienna Government Solutions Incorporated, and Lamont Copeland, Director of Federal Solutions Architecture at Verizon. And I'm going to assume that you all know what TDM networks are. Is that right? Anybody need to know? Yeah, I'm an English major. I had to look it up to be sure. So I won't.
Raise your hand.
Don't be shy.
We're going to start. I'm going to start with just a few questions, and then we'll let you guys have an opportunity to ask some questions as well. Jim.
Yeah.
Kind of an obvious question, but a very important question. Why is TDM modernization an important task for the DoD to undertake?
An excellent question, a good one, particularly in light of our subject matter today. But, you know, TDM, and that refers to a range of technologies, SONET, SDH, PDH, a number of alphabet soup things. But these are transport technologies that have been in existence since the late 80s and 90s. So we're talking about things that have been in the field for a fairly long time. And as a consequence, the technologies are old. They don't necessarily support upgrades. In many cases, in fact, in most cases, they're manufacturer discontinued. The ability to support them is considerably reduced, if non-existent. You pretty much have to support your own logistics train because you can't even buy these things anymore. So for a variety of cost, technology, and even capacity reasons, the older technology is really difficult to maintain in folks' networks. Now, the reason it's a particular challenge, though, is, normally you'd say, well, why don't you get rid of all of it? And in fact, there are many initiatives throughout the government to do that, in fact. But the issue is, because of the way DoD procurement works, because of many missions that were created, which are still supported by some of the older gear, there are many cases where it's actually rather difficult to get rid of the gear that is supporting these missions and these particular functions. So how do you put yourself in a position where you can still support older legacy gear, typically at the edge, and allow it to transport data, to continue to work as it was originally designed, decades ago, but without imposing hard constraints on the network itself, right? You'd like to be able to, run your equipment using the functions that originally had, but you don't want to be forced to build your network around those older protocols. You want to be able to support modern converged infrastructure for your transport network while still being able to support a mix of service types at the edge. And it's those kinds of problems which TDM modernization in general and TDM modernization in particular is trying to solve.
Yes, and totally agree with Jim on all those points. And one of the main things, too, around it, like we said, the operational issues that you're going to run into. Yes, you're going to run into all these parts which you're not going to be able to get anymore, not be able to procure. You're going to have these operational issues with trying to maintain those networks and continue the mission that's set forward. But tying it to what we're here today for at TechNet Cyber is also talking about the security aspects of it, too, as well. When you're looking at the TDM and those infrastructures that are being in place today, it's not that the people today aren't doing a very bang-up job of the men and women that are supporting and securing those networks, but when you start going through and you start seeing that aging of that equipment, you're going to see where people then and vendors are going to start moving away from the support elements of that, which are going to then impact how then you're securing that network. You're going to lose some of the patching that's going to be done associated with that. You're going to be losing some of the software updates that are going to be done with that. And these are things that, as you're supporting in an operations center, you're not built to be able to then design and reprogram these things. So you're going to run into these different security holes and security issues that are going to be associated with this aging infrastructure. So it's really imperative and critical that you're able to then migrate and move into the next generation technology and get off of TDM. Now, we'll hit about this a little bit later, but it's like, there's a difficult path to be able to do that. Like, there's a lot of things that you got to look at and make sure. And we know it's not easy to then refactor programs. Not easy to then move mission sets and operational applications off of these networks, because these are things that the government has relied on them for decades to be able to support this network. And then you're moving this into, what's the next bandwidth that's going to be used? How is going to be leveraging, something that is, going out to a data center? So there's a lot of things that got to be considered for that. There's a security impact to that. But the also other thing is when you want to get to these newer technologies, newer applications that are being out there, you're talking about infrastructures that are running on T1s, T3s. You're not going to be able to run some of these high bandwidth, high application, analytic applications over these TDM networks. You'll be able to figure out how to, bundle and patch it together. But when you start moving into more of these data intensive type applications, that's when then the bandwidth is going to be critical, and you're going to have to then move into a TDM infrastructure to be able to, moving away from, away from a TDM infrastructure into, whether it would be an optical network, an Ethernet network, or a wireless 5G or some other mobility network. So there's a lot to be able to consider for that, but yeah, it is important that we start trying to figure out how to move and work with the government to get them off these TDM networks.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Lamont, we've mentioned some of the challenges, but what are some of the causes of slower adoption of more modernized technologies?
Yeah. I'll hit upon three of them, and one of them is, I say, the culture and the risks that are associated with those cultures, and trying to make sure that you're able to adjust the environment that you're working from when you're trying to move from that TDM network. So what you're talking about is folks that they have the talent and the knowledge to be able to maintain the existing networks today. So now you got to go and retrain these individuals to be able to then move into this next generation technology. You got to get the new tool sets that are going to be associated with the management of these, and that's going to be part of that training that's going to have to be done with the operational teams. And then from there, you're going to have to then figure out, okay, how do I then meet all the security standards that are associated with these tool sets, and ensuring that you're reducing the risk when you're migrating these networks over to the Ethernet or wireless or optical networks that we're trying to move to today. There's also then a cost factor that's associated with that. We hear it a lot from a lot of our customers. It's like, what is my total cost of ownership? Why should I then figure out how to move from a TDM network into these new wireline and wireless technologies? What's the benefit for me? What's the benefit for my operations and the mission outcomes that I have? So, because what they have to then be able to understand and then figure out is, how do I then take that information and then put that into my program of record? How do I then go and budget this for the next year? And then how do I do this when you're looking at that in a migration phase and a phased approach? We know Rome was not built in a day. You can't just take a giant, 256 Army bases and move them automatically today to an Ethernet network, to a wireless network. There are a lot of things that go into the factor of that, not just from the cost elements, but into the operations, like I was talking about before, into the cultures that needs to be done, the people and process to be able to support that. How do I then migrate that and do this in a phased fashion where I'm not disrupting the men and women that are serving us today and their mission sets that they're doing? There's a lot of things that got to be factored into there. And then there's also the talent, too, as well. There's a lot of work and a lot of understanding of how to integrate these networks, integrate the applications with this network to be able to work today. And that's where I think it's working with partners like Ciena and Verizon to help you understand, okay, here's the total cost of ownership. Here's what we can do to help you with understanding how to change processes and procedures, get the right tool sets into place. How do you then figure out a migration path, which then reduces the impact on downtime, and how do you get to that? And then how do you also, how do the applications be able to leverage these networks when they start moving that, what you need to do refactor? And then how do I then bring that talent base to then figure out how to integrate this into your enterprise, into your mission, so that you're then able to understand and reap the benefits of the new networks themselves.
Yeah, Lamont just talked about a number of the critical issues, and another one of the things that drives the length of time it sometimes takes to do the migration is that, as befits a system there are systems that are older and have been in the field for a while. In many cases, the documentation of those systems and how it was configured and where the services are running, all that stuff kind of gets diffused and lost over the space of time. And it's running. Don't touch it, right? When you go to do an upgrade, actually a considerable part of the time it takes is really to figure out what the configuration of that network is, how the traffic's flowing. So there's a number of tools and processes that Sienna and our services team that supports these transition brings to the table to go and do the discovery, both of the network itself, the traffic, and not only that, really interviewing and working with the end customers to understand where the network needs to go, what kinds of transformation needs to happen. There's some services that, for example, will be migrated immediately. You'll just take them off from TDM and move them to Ethernet or one of the new modern protocols. And some of them will want to stay, and some of them will have a transition. There'll be differing transition periods. And so, doing that upfront work to really understand the scope of the problem up front and the overall migration plan is critical to having a successful modernization program. And it's things like that really matter and make a difference. We've looked in a couple of cases where folks perhaps got a little more ambitious in terms of timeline than they should, and they didn't discover all the things that need to happen. They ended up ordering, in some cases, the wrong equipment, and then you end up with doing an iteration cycle that you didn't have to do. So really taking the time up front to do the discovery work and the interview work and to map it all out, as Lamont did a great job of describing. That's some of the reasons why it takes the time, but why it's valuable to take that time. And the end result is better because of that.
Okay, great answers. Jim, back to you. Can you kind of walk us through some of the specific benefits of TDM modernization that will help DoD decision makers as they submit their budget requests?
Sure. So we've talked, about many of the problems, and so the answer to many of those problems, no surprise, is the modernization itself. But from a cost perspective, as you're looking at the overall costs of your current infrastructure and the benefits of a migration program, probably the easiest thing to look at is the costs of the services as they exist today. Now, the equipment itself, that's a sweated asset. It's been in place a long time. So the cost of that is probably this directly. But there's a bunch of hidden costs. And in many, if not most cases, the TDM services themselves, it's not just the equipment that's sitting at the end. You're transporting that data that equipment is generating across the network, and that network is provided by Verizon or other carriers. And guess what? They don't have a lot of the older equipment available, and when they do, it's expensive to maintain for a lot of the reasons that we talked about. So the underlying services that support the existing networks are much more expensive than they used to be, if you can even get them. So there's an availability problem, and there's a direct cost associated with maintaining older services that just cost a fair bit to maintain. We talked about support. In most cases, you can't get support for this product anymore, or these products anymore. It doesn't exist. So you have to do it yourself, which means maintaining your own logistics supplies and spares, and mining other places in the network where you can find the old gear. And so there's a whole logistics chain associated with supporting legacy gear in the network. And then there's just when you want to do a capacity upgrade, there's the cost of service itself. So the older TDM services are relatively slow, tens, hundreds of megabits, right? And modern systems are typically multi-megabit, multi-gigabit, really, type solutions. So in terms of a network where you want to grow, and that's the whole reason to do modernization, is you're looking forward to growing that network, the cost per bit for modern systems is dramatically better than it is for the legacy systems as well. So you're really looking at costs of direct services coming down as you move to the more modern packet-based services, costs of logistics coming down, and then then there's the intangible things, security. How do you put a price on that? Well, it seems like it costs a lot until you have a security escape, and then you're going to spend millions of dollars cleaning up after yourself. Bad idea. So it's things like that really, I think, change the business case from where you'd say, well, it's costing me nothing, because I paid for the gear 20 years ago. And if you really look at all the ancillary costs and hidden costs, if you will, it's relatively expensive to support that old infrastructure. And there's reasons to do it, like I talked about, the legacy equipment that still needs to be there to support mission. You can't just say, I'm going to toss it out, because then you toss the mission out as well. So you need to support it, but you want to support it in a way that is long-term sustainable and gives you an evolution forward. Because there will come a time when you will get that old gear out. So it's those things from a budget perspective that you really need to think about.
Yep. No, I totally agree with you, Jim. And a lot of it, like I said, the operational resiliency is very key to why you need to, what the benefits that you're going to be able to get out of moving from a TDM network into the next generation technology, wireline and wireless, whether it's Ethernet, fixed wireless access or more. The security aspects, as we talked about before, because when you start looking at, and you look at just the zero trust aspects and zero trust architecture that you see inside of the DoD, a lot of that talks about protection from the network itself. It's not just understanding what type of technology, like the different things that they're talking about with software-defined networking and how you would layer that on top of there, but it's really for those things to operate properly and to be able to give you the best benefits and performance associated with those applications that you're trying to make sure they're happening that are for supporting the end users. You want to make sure that underlying infrastructure is properly built in place and modernized to where it needs to be able to support that. There's always a performance benefit associated with that, which will benefit the end users and the applications that are associated with those end users today. So really, I mean, I'd say the security and operational resiliency are the two key parts of that.
Okay, excellent. And Lamont, staying with you, I know that Verizon has undertaken the same task of transitioning the entire enterprise from legacy to more modern technologies, and you've done that with the help of Ciena. Can you take us through that journey, and more importantly, what are some lessons learned that maybe DoD could take away?
Yeah, no, and we had the similar challenges as well. I mean, there was a rising cost associated with all the networks that we supported, and we supported multiple networks for a myriad of different reasons, myriad of different projects or products that we had. So what we looked at as Verizon was going and saying, okay, how do we then give the total cost for us to be able to bring down those maintenance costs, so that we can then pass those type of cost savings on to our customers. But then also, from the security aspect as well, making sure that we're providing the secure network to be able to support that. And then we're also building a network which would then support a lot of the new technology that we want to be able to deliver today. I'm sure a lot of you know, we spent a lot of money on some spectrum, a lot of 5G spectrum that we're trying to make sure that we bring to the DoD itself today. That is only possible by us being able to go and work with Ciena and others to upgrade our backbone, get to the next generation technology, bring in that new high capacity fiber, so that then we're able to realize how we can then bring these edge services out to each one of our customers. How do we then enable these AR/VR applications? How do we enable the SDN application or SDN network, so that we can then provide the application performance and the security aspects from the network itself today? So, I mean, we went through this journey, and it was one of those things we had to look at not just only the cost aspect of it, but how do we then migrate that network over without having a lot of impact to our customers? Because, as you know, we have the federal base that we have to support, but also we have a consumer base too, a very large consumer base that we're running over our networks from both the wireline and wireless side, from our cell phones, our enterprise services, and so on and so forth. So working with Ciena, we went through, figured out the strategy, figured out the cost that we would need to be able to work through that. What's the strategy then to do that migration, so we had as minimal downtime as we possibly could. Understand what our footprint was of all the assets that we had as well, because that's another part which you want to make sure that you're looking at is, what are all the associated assets inside of your network? These networks, is when we built these out, both us, DoD, you're building based off of the need. You had a specific mission, you had a specific goal, but then there were other elements that needed to be able to be cared for. So you end up having this, I wouldn't say sprawl, but you had these networks that grew larger and larger. So you need to understand, what are all the assets, what are all the footprint that I had to be able to then pull down and build that migration plan, and then that mitigation plan if something, God forbid, did go wrong, which luckily nothing did go wrong where we did the migration over. So, there's a lot of that planning. So I would say, from the understanding what the goal is, figuring out where your assets are, doing the strategic view of what everything is, setting the achievable milestones and outcomes that we wanted to be able to go through, and then executing on those and having the teamwork and the support to be able to then figure out if we needed to roll back or when we needed to move the customers over, what would be the right path to be able to do that. And with us doing that, it's enabled a lot of what we're trying to do today. So now I'm able to deliver out that, the FWA that I want to be able to do from a 5G standpoint or a 4G standpoint. I'm able to deliver out MEC services to that. And then that will then lead to other applications that I'll be able to layer on top of there to be able to support from a security aspect, from an end user consumer device aspect, from a security aspect. If I wanted to bring in something like a quantum security element where I'm doing quantum VPNs on top of my network to secure that network, all those things are now possible because now I'm able to, I now have a network that's been modernized thanks to the help with Sienna.
Yeah, I think from a DoD perspective, the thing to take away is really what you're looking at when you consider modernization, TDM modernization in particular, is it's really a holistic process. It's not just going in and upgrading some hardware. It's not just changing the process. It's not just informing the users and actually understanding how your network's going to evolve. It's all of that, the planning associated with it, and then the overall process of executing on that. And it's going to involve multiple parts of the organization, the IT organization in particular. But it's the whole. It's all the parts that form part of the whole that really makes that all come together.
Okay, great. Thank you both. One last question from me, and we'll start with Jim. Once the DoD completes a great majority of the TDM modernization initiatives, how will future modernization initiatives or activities be affected?
Yep, great question. And really, the reason to do the modernization, we've talked about a lot of the problem sets, but when you're done, the whole goal is to position yourself so that when your network continues to evolve, which it will, when you need more capacity, when there's a change in the mission requirements and you've got to maybe change the locations that the data has to flow, or you've got growth in the network in particular areas, when you've successfully created and migrated a network, not only do you have a newer network that has more capability and capacity, but you've also got the processes and capabilities in place to do rapid evolution. So these kind of initial TDM migrations, these are months long to maybe a year long events. Once done, you're in a position you want new capacity, additional capacity between a couple of different places in your network. Well, you slot a couple of cards, and you make some changes in your management system, and you're up and running. And so that's really the benefit that you're getting, is that you're positioned for growth, and you're positioned in such a way that when that growth occurs, irrespective of how it happens, you have the ability to adapt to that and make those changes quickly. And it doesn't mean that you need to have perfect vision and predict the future, but what it does mean is that you've designed your network with sufficient flexibility and sufficient excess capacity to adapt for new things that are going to hit you. Things are going to change in your user demand, and the needs of the network are going to be in such a way that you didn't realize that when you first did your upgrade. But if you've done your planning process correctly, and if you've appropriately allowed for the growth, which is part of the overall process, you'll be in a position where your network will be long-term supportable and able to adapt to a variety of missions going forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Jim. And I mean, we live in a very data-intensive world now. I mean, there's more data that's being generated by just you as an individual, as a user today, between your cell phones, sensors, laptops, all the information that's out there today, and that rides over these networks. That rides over a lot of the things we're talking about here today. And if you're not migrating and moving to that latest and greatest technology, you fall further and further behind because there's going to be more sensors that are going to be coming out there. There's going to be more automated cars. There's going to be more chat GPTs, and I promise chat GPT did not write my talk today. But there's going to be a lot more of these things that are going to be coming out there. So once you then migrate and move to this next generation of networking, and then you'll be able to then support these today. But then the key part about that is then having those technology insertion plans, having those ways to continue to innovate and working with partners like a Sienna, like a Verizon to come and have that conversation with you about, okay, what do I need to do to then continue to maintain that network? How do I continue to maintain the edge that I'm having so that when I'm working with anything from the latest and greatest for, if it gets into a quantum computing type element there, which we're all talking about today, what's going to happen when these next generations of compute come into place, when I have more things coming that's going to be going into these data centers and I have to then move between data centers or into a different, cloud provider, you're going to have that underlying infrastructure that's going to be there and ready for you to support that today. Because the network, the world is not going to slow down with the amount of data we're going to be producing. We're creating terabytes a day, or actually probably more like half a day, terabytes half a day, or we're just going over. And that the networks that underlying that are going to be key to be able to support that and support those end users, support those mission sets.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much. We have about 4 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions?
And if you do, step up to the mic because
Yes,
it
please
is being
step up to the
recorded.
mic.
So. Okay. Going once? Twice? All right. I guess we answered all your questions.
Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody for their time and attention today. Lamont and I will hang around a little bit afterwards. For those people who do want to follow up or have, want some additional background, there's some white papers on the chairs. If there's not a paper on your chair, walk up and get one. There's somewhere in the back. Actually, there's representatives from the extended Verizon and Sienna teams in the audience as well. So if you can't get to Lamont and I, just look for somebody with a check mark or a red Sienna lanyard.
Yeah, I would agree. And one of the last closing thoughts I'll say is this journey is not an easy journey. I know that, not just from a cost basis and a process basis, but also just an understanding of where to start and how to start that. I think what is good is you have industry experts like Jim's team, my team. Reach out to your account representative from Sienna and Verizon. We're more than happy to work with you, develop a plan, develop a way to then figure out how to bring that the migration path. If you are in the middle of that, whether you're in the middle of it, you're at the beginning of it, or you're close towards the end, having that expertise from folks which have done it for a bunch of networks, a bunch of customers on both the commercial and on the federal public sector side, we'll be able to bring a lot of that knowledge base to be able to then augment what you're doing today, to be able to then support you on that migration journey. So more than happy to stick around and answer any other questions, but thank you for the time and listening to our stories today.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you both. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your time. Enjoy your day and enjoy the show.
Think terabits. That's what we can do. Data, your network is not a problem, at least after the upgrade.
Yes.